This session is Passing Parameters, a complete summary from simple to complex. My name is Maka Encarnação. Who am I? Well, I'm a Bruin. I graduated from UCLA back in 2007. And a couple weeks after graduating UCLA, I joined Soliant Consulting. I didn't even know what FileMaker was when I joined Soliant. They taught me everything from the ground up, and I love it there. I'm still there 11 years later. I got certified while there as well. I am a speaker. I spoke in the 2016 DevCon. Had a total blast. Very much recommend speaking if you're interested in submitting a proposal. It's very fun. I was supposed to speak last year at DevCon, but unfortunately I wasn't able to come at all. I had a medical issue where I had some fluid buildup in the back of my eye and I couldn't see well in that eye. So apparently I learned when you're very pregnant, you have a lot of fluid everywhere, and sometimes it can end up in your eyeball. So probably a good thing I didn't end up coming, because a couple of short weeks after DevCon, I gave birth to my second daughter, and now the proud mother of 2 little girls. So here are my 2 girls together. I am also very proud to be part of the Women of FileMaker. So I am the lead for the mentoring committee. If you're interested in getting some mentorship or becoming a mentor, giving back to the community, check out our website to learn more about that. All right, so here's the problem. You need to pass multiple parameters into your script, but FileMaker only has one built-in method for passing parameters. There's lots of different workarounds. Which one should you choose? So we'll go over all these different workarounds today. These are the ones we're going to talk about today, using a return delimited list, a pipe delimited list, leveraging the let function, using name-value pairs, leveraging your script name, using JSON, and then we'll talk about how you can send complex relational data in your script parameter, and finally we'll go over containers. All right, so let's start from the top, return delimited list. Essentially what you're doing here is you're manually creating a list in your script parameter. So you pass in some data, and then you ampersand, pilcrow, ampersand, and then you pass in some more data, and then you repeat the same thing. And we're just creating a list. You could also use the list function if you have related data that you want to pass through your script parameter, or if you have things in a repeating field. You could theoretically use the list function. It's not very common. I would more recommend creating a manual list. It's probably more useful. So let's go over the demo file, which I created for this session. It is included in your session materials, and you can use this to kind of reference all the different ways of passing parameters. And let's look at this return delimited list option. So if I come in here, and let me zoom in a little for you. So you can see what I did was the data, the ampersand, pilcrow, ampersand, and then another data. And to add this ampersand and pilcrow easily, you can just click over here off to the side to add those into your calculation. And so now let's see what this button does. What happens when I press this button? All right, so this dialog is going to tell me, first of all, what method I use, which is essentially in this case going to be the script name, and what does the script actually receive inside the parameter. So this is one value altogether, and it's kind of what we would expect, right? A return delimited list. And my script is now able to take this list and parse it out and assign it to variables, and now I can use those values within my script. So let's take a look at how my script does that. Let me make this a little smaller too. Oops. All right, so if I come over here and I look in my script workspace, we'll click on the very first one here. And what I do is I assign everything, my entire script parameter, to one variable, which I call parameters. And now I can use this variable throughout my parsing within the script. So I don't have to keep saying get script parameter every time. So it's pretty straightforward for this. We're just assigning a variable, get value 1. So we're just grabbing the very first value from that list. And same, get value 2, get value 3 gets me my net worth, and then finally get value 4 gets me my date founded. And so let's take a look at the pros and cons of this method. So some of the pros is it's pretty easy. It's not too complicated to create that list manually, and it's not too complicated to take it out because you have that function getValue. Some of the cons, you have to pass all the variables in the correct order. If you mismatch the order, then your variables inside of your script are going to be mismatched as well. And you can't pass data with a return character in it. So if you have a text block that has paragraphs in it, then that data will actually get parsed out using the getValue function, and it's going to think it's two different values. So pipe delimited list is very similar, but instead of using a return character, we're using a pipe. And you could still theoretically use the list function, although it's probably not very useful, because if you did have a pipe inside of your list function, it's going to get substituted when you use the substitute function. So I don't really recommend that. And let's take a look at how we do that in the demo file. Oops. All right, so I come over here. Let's take a look at how this button is set up. And I will zoom in again. So pretty straightforward. Again, I'm just concatenating a ampersand, a pipe in quotes, and then an ampersand again. And then when I actually call that script, what does it look like? Let's find out. We'll click on this button. This is what my script gets. It actually gets a single string, and you'll see the pipe is in between there. And then how am I able to parse that? My script has to be able to parse that and assign them into variables. So let's take a look at how the script does that. So I come over here to my pipe delimited script. And again, I'm assigning variables, the parameter variables, to my entire script parameter. And then I'm using that throughout the parsing process. So let's take a look at the very first value that we're trying to grab. So I'm using the left function because I really want everything to the left of the very first pipe. So I say, here's my left function, here's everything, the entire parameter, and then find the position of the very first pipe. And I add this subtract 1 because I actually don't want to include the pipe inside my variable. I want everything before it. So then I have to do a subtract 1 at the end. So that's how you grab the very first value. The middle value is a little bit more complicated. We use a let function. How many of you are familiar with the let function? Use it? You love it? Isn't it the best? Yes. Okay, so I love the let function. If you're not familiar with it, it's a super, super valuable function to have. I use it all the time. You'll see it throughout this session. So basically what you can do in the let function is assign what we basically let variables. So this is a let variable, and it's the calculation is basically the position of the very first pipe in this case. And then I have my right pipe, which is a variable that is the position of the second pipe. And then the last part of the let function is a calculation, and this is what actually gets sent out when the let function executes. And in this calculation, we're basically saying, give us what's in between pipe 1 and pipe 2. And to do that, we use the middle function, pass in the entire parameter, and then the left pipe plus 1, again, because we don't want to include the actual pipe in our value, and then the position of the last pipe, the next pipe. Okay, and so to do any other values after that, all you have to do is increment the position of the pipes. So before we were concerned about pipe 1 and pipe 2, and now we're concerned about pipe 2 and pipe 3. But this part stays the same. And now finally, for the very last value here, we use the right function. So I want to find out where is my very last pipe, and I want everything to the right of that. So that's what this function does. So I pass in the entire parameter, and then I find the position of the very last pipe. And this is really telling me how many characters are to the right of that very last pipe, because I'm getting the length of the entire thing minus the position of the last pipe, and now I know how many characters are left. All right, so that's a little bit more complicated than using getValue, right? So this one's a little bit trickier. But once you have the structure down, you can copy and paste that and put that in your scripts if that's the method you choose to use. Oh yeah, well actually I may cancel and just save. All right, so we just talked a little bit about the let function, and we have these let variables, right? So you may notice some things a little bit different in this example. So first of all, why is there a $sign here? So one thing that's really cool, another thing that's really cool about the let function is if you add a $sign in front of those let variables, then they will persist outside of the let function. So it's a way to create variables inside your script. And so definitely you want to add a $sign in there when you're using it to pass parameters. So you also may notice, why my calculation area I'm returning $sign name? Well, I don't really care what I return there. I could return a 1, I could return a 0. I really don't even care about what I return here. All I care about is that these variables get created. So you could really put anything there. I just chose $sign name. Another thing you may notice is that there's some quotes here. Why are there quotes here? Well, that's because of context. If this let function gets executed inside the context of the button where I actually press it, by the time it gets into my script, then these variables are dead. They no longer exist. So I want to actually execute this let function when I'm already inside my script. So that way these variables will live inside my script and I can use them. So let's take a look at how that would work in this demo file. All right, let's click on this one. Okay, so just to kind of reiterate what I had already said, we'll have some quotes here. We'll make sure we put $sign name, and again, it doesn't matter what I return here. I could put 0, I could put anything, it does not matter. So then if I go ahead and demo this for you. All right, so here's my method used. I'm using the let function. Now you can see this is what actually gets inside of the script. And it's like a block of code is what it is. It's just a string of code. And my script is then able to turn that into results, into variables. It's able to parse that out. So let's take a look at how the script can do that. So jump over here to my let option. Well, look at that. It's a one-liner. How easy is that? All I got to do is wrap my script parameter inside an evaluate function, and it will just evaluate that let, and then your variables are already there. They're already set, already created, and I get to use it within my script. So that's a method. There is one more thing I want to talk about with the let function before I move on. So you notice when we send that code, the block of code, into our script, we're actually sending the field name and the table name, right? Well, what happens if your context changes from the time you press the button to the time you actually get into your script? This might not be able to evaluate. So if your context does change, let's say you're passing parameters into a separate file or a separate layout, separate window layout, you would need to do something like this. And this is the way to pass the actual data instead of the actual field name and table name. So in this example, it'll say like $sign name equals Toyota instead of $sign name equals manufacturer name. So I'll demo that really quick just to prove it to you guys in case you don't believe me. So here we go. So this is just, as you can see here, I'm passing in $sign name equals Toyota, now headquarters equals Toyota Japan, and so on. So something to keep in mind too with the let function. All right, so moving on to our next example here, name value pairs. So this is currently on the FileMakerStandards.org, and I've used this method before in a file that I've been maintaining for about 7-8 years now, and I really like it. It's a great method. So this uses a custom function. How many of you are familiar with custom functions, work with it? You like it? You love it? Yay? Custom functions is another thing I really love. You have so much power with custom functions. So, and there's a ton of custom functions out there in the community for you to grab. So Google it and see if you'll find something. All right, so this is a custom function. And essentially, this is the name and this is the value. This is the name, this is the value. We're just assigning name value pairs, and we're going to pass that into our script. All right, so let's take that look at that in the demo file. name value pairs. And you may notice that this is less typing than some of the other ones. So we're starting to make it a little bit easier for the developer, less typing. But again, we use the custom function, and then we have our name and our value, and then you can add multiple by just adding an ampersand in between your different combinations, your name value pair combinations. So let's take a look at how that will look once I pass it in. So you can see this is a single block of text that gets passed into your script, and then your script is then able to parse this out and turn it into variables. So let's take a look at how our script does that. So look at that, another one-liner, woohoo. And this uses another custom function, the assign function, to just to get that parameter and break those variables up for you. So really nice, not a whole lot of work for the developer. It's getting faster for the developer, less typing. All right, so we're going to move on to the next option here, which is leveraging your script name. So I'll tell you, this one is the current Soliant standard. So this is what we use at Soliant, and there's lots of benefits to it, and we'll talk about that. So you pass so there's a couple things to keep in mind here. You have here's your script name, and in your script name you'll notice that there's a parentheses, and then a value, and then some other values here, and these are essentially going to be your variable names. This is where we grab your variable names from. And you'll notice that there's semicolons in between each value. Another thing you'll notice, another custom function here, but these are different. Why are they different? Well, this is to explicitly state your data type. So now I can say £t, this is text. £n, this is a number I'm passing. £d, this is a date I'm passing. So the nice thing about that is if you're doing comparisons with your variables, then you don't have to wrap get as date, get as number around it. You can check, is this date greater than whatever date, or is this number less than another number? And you can use that when it's still a variable before putting it into a field. Yes, this one. All right, so we have, again, the custom function right here, and then we have your name, your value that you're passing in, and then we're just doing an ampersand. And you notice this is probably the least amount of typing that you could possibly do, because all you're passing in is your values. So if I click on that using script name, so this is what your script actually gets. So it gets it gets this whole string of text. This is all one big block, and then your script is then able to parse this out. One thing you may notice here is that there's an underscore here instead of how we had it in previous examples where there was no underscore. And that's basically just to designate that this value came from my script parameter, that it wasn't something that I created manually inside my script. So let's take a look at some of the pros and cons of this method. One-line variable retrieval. Oh, actually, we didn't talk about the variable retrieval. Let me jump to that first. That would probably be more helpful. Here we go. All right, so cool. This is how we turn those values into variables. Another one-liner. So we like one-liners. It's a lot less work. Cool thing about this custom function is you don't even have to pass in anything. You don't pass in the script parameter, it'll grab it for you. Another nice thing about this custom function is that it will do some error trapping for you. So one thing you may have noticed here, and I will make it a little bit easier. If you notice how this has a tilde in here, can anyone guess why there's a tilde here? Any guesses? I'll give you a hint. No? All right. It means it's optional. So our custom function here will check, it'll disregard any optional in the validation, but it will check to make sure that you have the right number of values that it's expecting to receive. All right, so now we can look at some of the pros and cons of this method. So one-line variable retrieval in the receiving script. The parameters can include any characters now, such as pipes and returns. There's less typing when passing your parameters. There's less room for typos because I type it in once up here, and I don't have to type it in again. I don't have to type it every single time that I'm calling that script. Let's see what else. The data type has been explicitly set by the user, and it's reserved inside the receiving script. It handles optional parameters well, and it also handles data validation on its own. So some of the cons, it's got custom functions required, and I don't know if I would really call that a con, but it just requires some setup, so you got to do some setup in order to get it going. The order of variable declaration does matter in this case, so I got to put things in the right order, or else when I assign them, it's not going to match. And there is a limit to 100 character counts in the script name. So that means I can't put more than 100 characters in here. So if you have a ton of parameters, that is a limitation to keep in mind. The next option here we have is JSON. All right, so JSON, thanks to FileMaker 16 and above, we now have these native JSON functions. And essentially what JSON is name-value pairs. So here's my name and here's my value, and I can pass in the data type as well. I can explicitly state what data type I want it to be. And so here's my name for headquarters and here's my value. And one thing that I thought was cool when I was working on this session was that you can use JSON set element within JSON set element. So if you want to create another JSON block inside of your JSON block, you can go ahead and do that. So here, this is what I'm doing to grab some related data and putting some related data inside my JSON. So let me show you how I'm doing that over here. All right. So here, this JSON up top is essentially going to pass in this data that's right here. And then this JSON is my related data. This is my children records. So it's going to grab the data from this portal. And you'll notice that I grabbed the first 5 names, the first 5 body styles, and the first 5 years from this portal. So well, what happens if you have more than 5 or less than 5 in your related data? Well, let's take a look at the demo file and see what happens when I call that function. All right, so you can see here, this all looks good. I'll zoom in a little. Yes, this all looks good right here. This is my data that came from this right here. But my models, my related data, have some question marks here. Well, because the JSON was trying to build those objects, but it was missing the data, so it put in question marks. So that's a little bit of an issue there. But you can see the rest of it looks good. And I'm still able to take this data and throw it all into variables up here. So let's take a look at how the script does that. Come over to JSON. Woohoo, another one-liner, yes. So all I'm doing is using another custom function, JSON create variables from keys, and I give it my script parameter, and now it'll just dynamically take all that JSON and throw it into keys, essentially using the name value pair method. If you didn't want to use a custom function and you wanted to do something native, it would probably look something like this. So I would sign my variable $name and use JSON get element, use that function, and throw in my entire script parameter, which is a block of JSON, and give it the key that I'm looking for. In this case, it's name. So if you wanted to do something manual, then that's how you would do it, but I would highly recommend just using this amazing custom function. All right, so some of the pros and cons of using JSON. So pros, it's got a one-line variable retrieval in the receiving script if you use a custom function. The parameters can include any characters, so that's really nice. You don't have to worry about that. No custom function required in creating the parameter, assuming you're using JSON or using a FileMaker 16 and above. You can easily build up JSON across multiple scripts. And this is probably the reason why I love JSON the most. You could build something super complex over multiple scripts, multiple files even. You could send and keep building and building this JSON as you need it. The order of JSON elements doesn't matter. You could create them in any order, and it passes related data really well. So why did I just say that if I just showed you a bunch of question marks? That it didn't look like it passed the related data that well. Well, I'll come back to that after I go over the cons. Some of the cons, it's got a verbose parameter. It's kind of a lot of typing. You can see, like, compared to some of our other methods, this is a decent amount of typing. And the data types aren't always preserved. So I'm going to talk about that in a couple of slides as well. You can't have periods in the keys. So periods in the value is okay, but if you were to, in this case, like put this a period something else, like name.1, then it's going to get confused. So it's going to think it's a path like this. So you can't put periods in the keys, just something to keep in mind. Don't want you to get tripped up. Let's see, where was I? Oh. Okay, so return character in the value turns it into a /r. So let me demo that for you really quick. So if I had a return value, let's say here I'm just typing a test, and I come over here and now I grab this JSON. You can see in here it turns it into a /r. So if that's going to be a problem for you when you're passing the JSON, then you may have to fix it. All right, moving on with JSON. What else did I promise you? I promised you, oh, so the related data. Yeah, why did I say that? All right, so we talked about, I showed you guys how we could theoretically pass related data this way, but what if we did it a different way? So let's take a look at this option here. So this first half is the same. I'm just using essentially my name value pairs to create the JSON for this data. But now for related models, I'm using another custom function. And this custom function, you put in the name of the object. So it could be whatever you want it to be. In this case, we used models. And then we're using a return delimited list of the fields that I care about. So I'm using name, I'm using body style, and I'm using date. And then I need to tell it where. I need to tell it where to grab this related data. So I'm giving it the table name. So that's basically what you have down here in your portal. And now I need to know how many related data are there. How many related records are there? So you could get that pretty easily by using the count function. So just count how many primary keys are in your related data, and that'll tell you how many related records you have. And these empty parameters is used in the recursion, so you don't have to worry about them. You just got to pass them in as empty. So now when we use that function, that method, let's see what happens here. Cool, I only got the 3, no question marks. And this is exactly what I expected it to get. So now I'll show you, if I come over here to one that has less records, so I only have the Model 3 and the Model X here, I can go JSON related data. Cool, I only have the 2. And it just automatically builds that JSON for me. So that's a nifty little trick to get some related data on there. So let's go back to talk about data types. So what did I mean when I said doesn't match up perfectly? So FileMaker has a text. We have the text data type. JSON has string, and they match up pretty well. FileMaker has number. JSON has a number, but a little caveat that I'll explain in the next slide. FileMaker has date, time, timestamp. JSON, you can use either string or number. and you'll just have to use get as date, get as timestamp to convert that back once it's in FileMaker. So one cool little trick that John Renfro pointed out in the forums was that if you save JSON as a number data type, then if the computer has any weird date formatting, it gets ignored. So that's a cool way to get around any date formatting from different computers. And JSON also has objects, arrays, and null, which doesn't really translate that well in FileMaker for what we're talking about for data types. All right, so what did I mean when I said numbers don't translate that well? Let's look at this example. My favorite let function is back. So we have a number, it's 18 digits long, right? And then I throw it into JSON, so it looks like that once it's in JSON. And then I extract it out of JSON using the JSON get element. So what happens? Okay, cool, I got back exactly what I put in. Perfect, I'm happy. Now what happens if I increase that by one more digit, and now I have 19 digits? So I'll throw 19 digits into JSON. This looks a little different. Turn it into scientific notation. And then when I extract it out, it's not the same, right? And now get as number around it. Well, guess what? I actually lost some precision. So this rounded up. This should be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but it made it 6 and it rounded it up. So if you are using JSON and you're passing really big numbers, you gotta be careful. There is a workaround though. Just pass it as a string, pass it as text instead of a number. So if you change that to JSON string, then your number is preserved fine. All right, a couple JSON tips. Use the custom function, JSON create vars from keys, created by the brilliant Mislav Kus, and custom function that we talked about for getting related data. I also want to talk about API and JSON integration. So this is an example API from Weather Underground, and you can see that it's returning JSON. And we have the somewhat new option for curl, specified curl options. If you're doing insert from URL, you probably will get JSON back. What about the data API? Guess what you'll be getting back? Most likely it's going to be JSON, right? And what about the admin API? You're also going to be working with JSON. So my whole point of talking about all these APIs is that if you use JSON to pass parameters in your day-to-day life, you get used to reading JSON, you get used to writing JSON, you get used to creating it, and you just get more comfortable with it. It can be said that doing that will help you make the next leap, will prepare you to make the next leap to integrating with APIs. It'll make it just that much less scarier to give it a shot. So that could be a reason to try out JSON. All right, so I couldn't go much into JSON or in the admin API and the data API, but I did want to point out these sessions, and I can't tell you to go see them because they're all done, except for I think one of them is going on right now, but I don't want you to leave, I want you to stay. So you can check out the recordings of these sessions if you want to learn more about the data API and the admin API. All right, so one other thing I promised was passing containers. So I'm going to demo for you how to do it using base64 encode and base64 decode, and then I'm going to tell you why you probably shouldn't do it. And then I'm going to tell you another way that you could do it, okay? So don't worry, you'll be fine. So let's take a look at that. Okay, so I have my logo right here. Here's my logo that I just grabbed from Google. And I have this option to set the container through parameter. So let's take a look how I'm doing that. All I'm doing is wrapping base64 encode around my logo. And what that does is it'll take your container and turn it into a text string, essentially. And then in my script, come over here to container, I grab my parameter and I throw, in order to set my container to, all I do is throw base64 decode around it, around my parameter, and I have to specify the name of that file. And this is actually, by the way, a cool way to just rename your container. If you want to rename it, you can just use base64 decode and code. So now that's going to set my container into the new field. So let's demo that really quick. See what happens when I do that. All right, so cool. Here's my image. Looks good. Well, what did you notice? Did you notice anything else? Where did this go? I lost some attributes. Some of my metadata went away when you use base64 encode and base64 decode. So that's a bit of a bummer. You know, it doesn't really matter in this case because I didn't have anything there, but I'll show you really quick when there is data there, what it looks like. And a little backstory. So when preparing for this session, I was thinking about, well, what kind of file can I make? Both my husband and I ended up getting new cars this year. Something about like having babies and you want to get the nicest, newest thing because protect your babies. So I ended up getting a Toyota Highlander. So this is my other baby. I was like so proud and happy to get this one. And my husband, he put in a down payment to order the Tesla Model 3 the day that it was announced. So that was like 2.5 years, 3 years ago. And so he actually got his car 2 days before I flew out to here, to the offsite, or to DEF CON. And so this is my husband in his brand new Tesla Model 3. He's very happy. Any Tesla fans out there? It's like such a cool car, right? I was like, does anyone own it? No? Oh, you gotta own it. It's so cool. It's really cool. I got to drive and I was like so scared. It goes so fast. Okay. Anyways, so this is a picture I took of my husband when he got his Tesla. And so now you can see it has some data in here, and it's got, it's got the date and the time and my phone, my make and model of my phone. So when I use it with base64 encode, that data is gone. That's a bit of a bummer. So if that's important to you, then you probably want to avoid using base64 encode. However, here is a workaround, and I will show you that really quick. You can just set it to a global container. So you could create a container that's a global. So in this case, it's logo_G, just to tell me that it's a global. I'll set my first container to that, and basically you're using your global container as a middleman. You're like putting your original container in there, and now you're taking your new global and putting it into your container 2, the second container. So we'll assign my second container to the global. And so what happens when I press that? Whew, my data's back. So I didn't lose anything. So that is why you should probably use global containers if you can. All right, so moving on here. Some general tips. You want to try to be consistent. I know I just throwed like a ton of information in your face right now. It's a good idea to pick one method and try to be consistent within your file, because you don't want to confuse yourself and you don't want to confuse somebody else who's coming in and working on your file. That being said, I do want to say, if you have a really obvious use case for a different method that you're not using, and I think an API would be an amazing example of that, you're probably going to use JSON for that, then, bend the rules. But for the most part, you want to try to be consistent. Use the script signature. I know we talked about how to leverage the script signature to actually create your variables, but it's also awesome for reference. Like now I know what the script is expecting. I know the order. I could do a spelling comparison, made sure I didn't have any typos there. So use your script signature. I always recommend doing that. Use the script header. So you can use the first couple comments in the top of your script to just explain kind of, what's the purpose, what's the dependencies, and you could talk about your parameters in there too. It's a good way. It's always good to self-document your file as much as possible. All right, and then I've seen this done before, and I think it's really cool. You can use the first 2 scripts as basically documentation. Like, this is the method I'm using. This is how I'm using it. Here's a template of it. So if someone is watching you, if someone is covering for you while you're on vacation, they have all that information right there. You don't have to kind of hold their hand, walk them through how your file works. All right, so here's a summary of the things we went over today, using a return delimited list, a pipe delimited list, a let function, name value pairs, leveraging your script name, using JSON, sending complex relational data, using those custom functions, and finally, containers. This session will have updates, and and actually I do want to say I found a bug in my demo file, so make sure you download it again. Thank you so much, and please fill out evaluations.